Hello everyone, it's Sky here today for another video about how I started my own Faire accessories handmade brand. So the reason why I wanted to do this was because I've always wanted to sell something that I had made myself, but I never really figured out what I wanted to sell, and I knew I couldn't do full-on cosplays, but I could do a little bit of the Faire side. So that's where I came up with the idea of Enchanted Moth Hollow. The sort of vibes I was looking for was the magical yet practical uses of Faire items, so that's where I landed on making the autumn bag and the Mothwings cloak. So at the very beginning, I wanted to make a brand that was really me, and I thought the perfect thing was, of course, moths. And I really wanted to incorporate that into the brand, so moths galore. And I also wanted to, of course, have it be, that enchanting sort of foresty vibe. So here is sort of the color palette I was going for, as well as some of the reference images for the aesthetics that I wanted, all together on a mood board, and that's where I created my very first icon. This icon is completely handmade by me in Illustrator so that it's vectorized and I can scale it and put it on all of my stuff, like a good little brand. So let's talk about production. When I first started prototyping the Mothwings, I of course had made my own in March of this year, but they had a 7-foot wingspan and required 2 sets of queen sheets. So one of the first things with prototyping was, of course, making the wings a little bit smaller. They have about a 5'8" wingspan now, so that they're a little bit more accessible and easier for me to make and lower cost. For the autumn leaf belt bag, I had originally started on some scrap fabric that I had, but my first mistake with prototyping this was not using a thick or faux leather to start with, because I couldn't really get the shapes down and how the fabric would actually feel and act in my hand with a prototype. The fabric that I used was pretty thin and almost like a burlap sack style, but it taught me about the general shape and size that I needed. I needed to make a little bit longer in the back, and for the leaves I couldn't do stitch through because my sewing machine could not handle it, so I could only stitch on one side. I got to make my own bag from the leather that I bought, and that really taught me a lot of skills and stuff that I needed, such as what steps to do when. So for the process of the Mothwings, they're pretty simple and straightforward. So first, of course, I printed off my own pattern, which you can find here on Etsy. And then from there, I scaled them down and made sure they were the right size and cut them all out, taped them all up, yada yada yada. And from there, I had traced them onto my recycled fabric and started hand dyeing them. I really like the effect that hand dyeing has. It sort of has a marbled look on the wings, which adds some very nice texture variety to them. Next, of course, was painting them. I had originally hand painted and traced out all the details, but I had discovered that that takes a long time, so I made a stencil for each side of the wings, large and small. With the stencil, I could go ahead and paint a lot quicker because it was already blocked out and I didn't need to figure out the shapes or the sizes or the orientation they needed to be, which was perfect. Final steps of the Mothwings, all I had to do was sew on the lining, which I used another recycled material for, and sew them together so it was an actual cloak and not just 4 pieces, and add the clasp. The autumn leaf bags were pretty uncharted territory for me. First, I started off with this giant roll of faux leather because I was very ambitious and thought I could make 15 bags. I have 2. But I had started off with making little pattern blocks so I could see how much fabric each bag needed and transfer them into Photoshop to make sort of a plan about how I'm going to cut them out. And then I started tracing all the blocks and cutting them out by hand. Luckily, I had figured out how to learn my silhouette cutter, so I actually put the leaves, both the top leaf and the bottom leaf, onto the silhouette so they could be cut out, and it was so nice. It was so fast and easy and perfect, and honestly, lifesaver, game changer, get one. After those were cut out, I went ahead with experimenting with a little bit of different styles of adding the veins to the leaf. The way that I figured out worked the best was adding the veins before I sewed the 2 leaves on top of each other and turn them inside out. So that way my machine didn't have to sew through 4 and 2 layers of faux leather. Next for the bags, I actually just assembled the base, which was pretty straightforward. It was just about 2 of the same size pieces plus the gusset, and you just attach them like that so it's a little bag, and I went ahead and added the lining too so that it all sat nicely together. One of the most challenging parts for the autumn leaf bags was attaching or figuring out a way to attach the leaves to the bag. My machine cannot sew through 6 layers of faux leather. So I had to make the sacrifice, and I had to pick up some waxed thread and a leather needle and some pliers and hand sew the leaves to the bag. This turns out to be not as long as I thought it would take, but still long. It hurt my fingers a lot, but the hold is really secure and I think it looks pretty good. Finally, of course, is adding the magnetic closure to the bags and just hand sewing those on, and bam! You got an autumn leaf belt bag. The final part of production, of course, is the social media, which is more of the unseen part of production. But I knew I needed a social media presence in order to generate sales and an audience that would follow my brand as it continued. And unfortunately, I started this really late in the process. I should have started this earlier with more samples and social media stuff. But you live and you learn, and I have an Instagram set up for it now, and eventually, if this is successful and it's doing well, moving it onto its own Etsy shop and making a TikTok for it. Well, now that we're done with production and launch is quickly around the corner, if I check my non-existent watch, it is in 2 days. Here's a little bit of what I learned and what I would do differently if I had the time and the foresight. First, I would actually start to make the full prototype out of actual materials that I was going to use in order to get the time and the effort that it would take me so that I could better plan out about when I want to have this store launch date and also how many bags or moth wings I could get done in that time. The next thing I would have done differently is, of course, started my social media campaign a lot sooner. To sort of generate that hype over the course of a month and a half instead of just a week, so as to not overload my current audience on my cosplay page and to just help generate and foster a new audience and people that would, buy this stuff. Because, I mean, what's the point of me spending all this time making stuff and just nobody sees it? So I would have done that differently. Finally, for the last thing I would have done differently is I would have recorded a lot more work in progress content. This is something I'm trying to do better as I sort of transition my YouTube channel from ASMR into crafting focused content, is to include and have more of these clips that I can show y'all that aren't also recorded in vertical mode. Sorry about that. So what is my plan after I have either sold out of all of my launch items for this launch or for the future of Enchanted Moth Hollow? I had sort of decided that if I sell out of all the items within a certain time, that time has not yet been decided, but I guess I'm just sort of going off of vibes, which, I do a lot. But when that time comes, I plan on switching to a made-to-order system for the moth wings and the autumn leaf bags, just so that I have time to work on them as well. I have all 15 autumn leaf bags cut out and ready to sew, but I just do not have the mental energy to do that right now. But I do plan on going to vending opportunities in the future about selling my wares, my wares in person. So I also want to keep a small inventory for that and list them to my Etsy shop after the fairs have passed and any leftover items that are still there up for purchase. And I already have a couple of ideas for what I want to make next for another drop, so as soon as this drop's over, taking that time to decompress and then ramping right into it. Thank y'all so much for watching this video. I know that I have been very sporadic with my video uploads. A lot of them have been a little bit short or a little bit old, but that was because I was mainly occupied with working on this and guesting at my first convention. So thank y'all all so much for your cooperation and support. It means the world to me. And just a reminder, Enchanted Moth Hollow has its first launch/drop on October 8th at 12 PM CST. You can find those goods over at skylinestarscosplay.etsy.com right here or in the description. And don't miss out, because I only have a limited stock. Thank you all so much again for watching, and have a great weekend! And thank you so much to my patrons, Anbu and GenericWhiteMale. Your support means the world to me. I'm also looking to overhaul my Patreon soon, so keep tuned!